Okay, hello, Madeline. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, welcome everyone. Today we have Madeline Blunt. She is VP of Data at Fanatics Betting and Gaming. So, did you get to catch the eclipse yesterday, or
I did not.
okay?
I was on a call and totally forgot about it. I know that's the worst answer, but I can't lie.
Yeah, it's okay. You're not the only one. I caught the tail end, but I'm sure there'll be tons of pictures and video clips that we can find on social media.
But hey, I didn't miss the earthquake.
Oh my, how was that for you?
Very confusing.
Yeah.
As an Australian who has only ever lived on the east coast of the US, not something I was prepared for.
Yeah, it was a shocker, and I think I heard that there was 2 earthquakes in one day. I was actually out of town that day, but, I did get calls from family members and stuff like that.
Good day to be out of town.
So, back to you. In your bio, I did read that you're initially from Sydney, Australia. Your work has brought you to Berlin and now New York City. So, can you tell us a little bit about your career journey and how you ended up as VP of Data at Fanatics?
Sure. Um, I got into product management sort of during my undergraduate degree, just a series of fortunate events landed me in an internship with a company that desperately needed junior product people. And so that was back in 2010, before there were standards as to who you would hire into a product role. Today it's an incredibly competitive field, but back then it was a little easier to get into. And so I started working with a company that's now Australia's biggest e-commerce clothing provider. It's called The Iconic. Worked with them for a few years, and then, you know, being in my early 20s, I felt the urge to adventure around the world a bit, and so I relocated to Berlin. Berlin has one of the best tech scenes, or it did about 10 years ago, in Europe, and so I was able to continue working on digital products there. And from there, I found myself working for a news app, basically in a collaboration with Samsung. And that was where I really started working on data for the first time, because one of the things we had to do to launch that news product successfully was monetize it. And so suddenly we were talking ad integrations, content targeting, yield management, all of the beginnings of work that this audience knows very well. And through that was around the time that the GDPR law was really like at the peak of sort of being drafted and being passed in 2015, and being there for that experience and implementing that the first time in Germany turned out to be valuable experience. And so a couple of years later, when it really came into full effect for American businesses, there was a skill shortage related to people who had experience with implementing privacy policy on the publisher side. And that's sort of how I found my way to Amazon in the US. And yeah, if you told me that I would end up living in New York City working in tech when I was a little girl who would have said she wanted to be a ballerina when she grew up, I would never have believed you. But here we are.
Look at that. I mean, definitely a well-rounded experience. It sounds like, the Berlin situation was certainly right place, right time, and everything just worked out. So, when I was researching to learn more about you, it's very evident that you are passionate about what you do. And we all know data to be a very specific part of our industry. So I'm just curious to know, what about data interests you? What drew you to data? How did you end up in the data space?
I think initially it was sort of the physicality of data, by which I mean, you know, when you talk about having data, what does that mean? Um, what is it? Where is it? Just the literal sort of manifestation of data was fascinating to me for a while. And so you start to learn about like all of the different types of data. And really what we mean now when we say data is we mean mostly behavioral and transactional data from people using the internet. But that's obviously not everything that data has meant over the millennia. Data has previously just meant information. And so thinking about it, through the lens of an asset, something that exists, something that you have, it leads you pretty quickly down the path of like, how can I get that asset to work for the company, or work for me if it's an individual project, or basically how can I leverage what I have? And turns out that's the way everybody thinks about it. And so there's a great deal of opportunity in the space of sort of the collection and the management and the leveraging of data. So that's the angle that I came to it from.
Awesome. This was one of my questions a little bit down in our discussion, but I'm going to move it up since you mentioned it. Behavioral data. I know it is very important in the betting and gaming space. And I was just wondering, can you tell us a little bit more about the machine learning driven framework that you and your team are working on to help identify behavioral red flags at
Yes. That has been a really, really great piece of work over the last few months. So that's related to, within the realm of gambling businesses, there is a domain of responsible gaming, which is basically all of the things that we as gambling operators need to do to ensure that we're taking reasonable steps to prevent people from falling into problem gaming habits, prevent people from, causing damage to their lives that they don't want to be having, and also towing that fine line between, the false negatives, frankly, in statistical terms. If you fail to help somebody that needed help, and then the inverse, if you attempt to funnel someone down a path of help that is not actually appropriate for them, you've mislabeled them as a potential problem gambler. So these ideas of like false positives and negatives and the precision and recall of a model, like that's how it translates into a data context. There are lots of people in my business and in other businesses who are subject matter experts on problem gaming and all of the many laws and regulatory components that go into having a problem gaming offering as a business. But where my team has been working has been specifically on the prediction side of it, which means basically taking a huge amount of data, indicating customers sort of their wallet habits, their deposits and withdrawals, their betting habits, their casino usage habits, etc., and recognizing a subset of customers who are known to have problem gaming. Of course, you work with that customer group to help them immediately, but what you can also do is train the data to look backwards and say, okay, find me other customers who look like those customers. And that's effectively what the prediction challenge has been. And it's been about getting the accuracy and the performance of that model up to a place where our responsible gaming team internally can use it. And, I know this audience knows that doing the analysis is not enough. You have to take that insight all the way through into something materialized that your stakeholder can use. And so it's not enough for a data scientist to write a model and say, hey, betting on a day other than Saturday is one of the biggest predictors of having a problem gambling behavior. And it's a very different thing for a data scientist to say, I've scored our entire customer base. Here's a dashboard ranked from highest to lowest risk. Here's the details of why they got that ranking. And here's your ability to easily click in and go and investigate that person and decide as a team if you'd like to take further action, which is what happens. And so that, like, operationalizing that data model was just as much work and just as important as writing the model has been.
Awesome. So you mentioned before we got into behavioral data that you spent some time at Audible. And I did read that you spearheaded the implementation of, their AI team, amongst other things. So can you tell us a little bit more about your time at Audible?
Yeah, it was the years that I was at Audible were incredibly important years for the evolution of data in that business. And, that movement had begun before I was there and it continued after I left. And so, by no means was I attempting to sort of paint anything there about sort of my involvement specifically. But I will say what we were able to do in those few years was really bring together a lot of disparate work streams between brilliant data scientists who are holed up in corners of the organization, not necessarily well connected to the business, not necessarily well connected to tech. Establish with the business where the primary domains for investment in AI, like where we strategically wanted to get an advantage the most, and distilling that down into areas of AI, beginning to hire the team, the product side of the team that would sort of help execute that strategy. And then that was basically what I had time for before I moved on. But it was really, those were the years where the talk about AI and the talk about having internal data science capability really materialized into a strategy for the first time. And it was fascinating to be there for those years. And it was also turbulent because, that's a time of change, and it impacts a lot of people and a lot of roles and a lot of strategies.
AI is what I like to call the talk of the town. I mean, it comes up everywhere in our industry. And, speaking of AI, are there any data challenges that AI is helping to solve at Fanatics?
Oh, yeah, plenty. I mean, and more than you would even imagine. The Fanatics, the business that folks normally think of is the e-commerce business, where you buy sports merchandise and licensed apparel, et cetera. They've been using AI to help with their manufacturing forecasting and their supply chain and delivery logistics operation for years and years. That's not typically how we think of AI, but it still is AI. It's just not the sort of digital marketing connotation that has become so heavily associated with the commercial use of AI. So there's a whole world of intelligence over there about that side of the business. But in addition to that, of course, Fanatics is a business that has several businesses now, including the traditional e-commerce business, the betting and gaming business, a collectibles business. And so we can touch the same person, the same customer, multiple times through the different businesses, even on the same day sometimes. And so our ability to leverage that into intelligence that's really, really hard to copy, if not impossible, that is obviously a big area of investment where we're doing a lot of cool stuff, which I can't get into.
Yes, understood. Maybe by ops, you'll be able to get into some of it. So you co-authored an amazing book. It's titled Precisely, Working with Precision Systems in a World of Data. So how did that idea come about? And what did you learn when you were writing it?
Because I am a glutton for punishment, I decided to do a master's degree while working at Audible, and then later while working at Index Exchange. I was very, very fortunate to have, bosses and leadership at both companies who were supportive of me doing that. But I went to Columbia. I studied economics and public policy, which is really it's mainly an economics degree. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, after 10 years in consumer tech, I had sort of reached, what felt like a mid-career crisis of just, I needed something totally different, totally fresh. But also secondly, just, as a human who has interests other than work, the whole world of public policy and how laws get designed and shaped and executed and the impact that they have on populations has always been fascinating to me. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go do that. In my first semester in the first class, the first professor that I worked with, this guy called Zach Tuman, he was running this awesome class about basically the impact of technology on public policy, which is exactly why I had gone there, was to go to classes like this. After that semester had wrapped up, he reached out to say, I'm writing another book. Do you want to co-author it with me? I'll be the seasoned international policy guy, and you be the young tech blood, right? And together we can write the book that we wish we'd had. And so we did that, and it took 4 years, which is longer than either of us imagined in our wildest dreams that it could take. But over the course of doing that, we interviewed maybe 100 really fascinating people in fields as diverse as using computer vision to identify weed from crop on a tractor in a millisecond, all the way through to how to discern the genre of a song from its construction. And it's, zooming right back out to sort of like the why did you get into data? And I was talking about the physicality of it. Really, I just keep coming back to this message over my career, my working life, of the way that we look at it, primarily from like a yield and a marketing lens today, is deep and rich, but it's also a very narrow view, and it can be really inspiring sometimes to look at what data means in other industries, draw inspiration from that, and bring a bit of a fresh perspective. So as much as it was a challenge to write a book alongside doing the degree alongside work, I am now, in retrospect, glad that I did.
Yeah, what an amazing opportunity. I have to get my hands on a copy. For everyone who is attending this live, just keep in mind that you're able to get a signed copy of Madeleine's book at AdMonsters Ops this June 3rd and 4th in New York City. So back to our Q&A. Another thing that is heavily buzzing in our industry is regulations. And if there's one thing about ad tech and sports betting and gaming, both industries are heavily regulated. And I was just curious, how are you working within those constraints?
Gambling is more of a state by state regulated business than ad tech is. But ad tech obviously does have state specific regulations, which is becoming, more and more rich of a tapestry in the last couple of years, really kicked off by the introduction of California's privacy laws a few years back. Prior to that, it really had been more of a nation by nation patchwork. And then obviously the EU's done a lot of policy driving globally. One of the key differences in approach between how we did things in ad tech and how we're doing things in gambling today is, well, both industries are very thriving with regulatory activity today. So federally, gambling only became legalized in 2018, and that's when the online gaming industry that we recognize today started budding state by state. States came online. And they too have been developing and increasing and refining their regulation over the years. But one of the bigger differences is to operate in a state as a gaming company, you need a license, which means that absolute compliance with every state specific rule is a prerequisite for launching a business there. And the relationship that we have with our partners in various state regulatory bodies it's every day. It's direct communication every day. And that's not how I found it to be in ad tech. The regulatory waters of ad tech move more slowly, and they are bigger waves. Something will come out at a national or an international level that's been in the works for many years. And during those years, ad tech companies have been unpicking, understanding, trying to interpret. Bodies like the IAB have to come up with technical standards intended to meet these regulations when typically the regulations haven't been written in such a way that specifically dictates technical expectations. So there's this whole like world of interpretation and discussion. And that's not a thing in gaming, but it's teeny tiny compared to what it was in ad tech. It's very much more like we need this, and this, and otherwise you can't operate. And that's like the clarity of that, makes it a lot easier to just do it and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for, elaborating on that. I do see two questions here from content director Lindy Johnson. How hard is it for businesses to learn which systems work best for them?
Is that question in context of the regulatory question from before, or is that just more general?
I think it was more general because I did see this come in before we got into regulations.
I think that like the most effective answer that I can give in a more general context would be usually trial and error. A lot of businesses spend a tremendous amount of time doing very extensive, partnership RFIs and basically prolonging the decision-making period by trying to eliminate risk through finding out the answers to things in advance. And broadly speaking, with a very general wash, like if we did less of that and more of trying, I think we would be able to find the answer of what works best much more quickly. Not to say that that's something companies can just shift and do today. It's not. I mean, these sort of commercial and legal negotiations are there for a reason. But one of the side effects is that it makes it very hard to just innovate or try and move on, which in my opinion is the best way to find out what works for the business.
Absolutely. So she hopped in here and she said she was asking about precision systems. So let's see, how hard is it for businesses to learn which system works best for them? Which factors must they consider to find the right precision system? So that's a better way to.
Yeah, got it. Okay, cool. It always is going to start from what is the outcome that the business is trying to achieve at a very, very, very high level. For example, as a publishing business, are you trying to stabilize revenue? Are you trying to, move from an open programmatic to a subscription-based revenue model? Are you trying to, build a coalition to compete with walled gardens, et cetera? So assuming that there's some articulation of strategy to work backward, that's the biggest driver, because data is just tech, and tech should always be working in service of the business. So once you've got that aligned, the next question is, what do you have? Do you have any data? Could you have any data? Is there data out there that you're not collecting? Is there data sprinkled over in little databases everywhere that's never met and talked with each other? So the landscape of results you can see can be very varied. It can range from, no, we've got a lovely clean customer database, we've been maintaining it in an Excel spreadsheet for years, all the way through to it's chaos, nobody knows where anything is, the engineer who built it left, etc. Which unfortunately, I think we've all seen a lot of. Let's assume that you have a pretty good base to start from on both of those questions. You've got a pretty clear idea of the business goal and a pretty clear idea of what assets you have. Determining what kind of sort of analytical approach or precision system is going to make sense relies on having some understanding of like the skill set that you need to answer the question that you have. For example, let's say that you're a business who's trying to move from, an open ad funded model to a prescription model. The first thing that you're going to want to do is understand what type of person subscribes today and how can I find more of those people? And that is instantly a certain type of data problem. That's a predictive classification problem. You're going to be talking about audience extension, lookalikes, et cetera. On the other hand, if you were trying to form a coalition to compete with walled gardens, you might be talking more about standardization, shared data storage, et cetera, and then some kind of like open source analytics function. So, one thing I'll say is that it's going to sound unhelpful, but bear with me. Usually, it doesn't take a data person to know what you want to do with data. It only takes a data person to tell you how to do that. So the reason I say that might sound unhelpful is it kind of validates the sort of execs know exactly what to do, and so they'll just tell you exactly what to do kind of thesis, which is not what I'm trying to suggest. I'm mainly saying it's usually very intuitive. If you have a business asset and you're pretty good at understanding what that is, then joining up the next step of what you want to make it be able to do for you, that doesn't require like deep technical or deep data expertise. It's about choosing the right people, investing in the right teams and the right tools to give you the best chance of executing on that you can. And that is where I think teams fail a lot. I think that having a good understanding of the business priority, having a good understanding of the data, having a good understanding of the goals of what the data should be able to do, you can get that far without having a big data science team easily. And so I think that folks, especially folks in leadership positions, because they've got a trillion other decisions to make that day, they will think that because they've taken those 3 steps, that they know what the 4th and 5th step is too. When in reality, that's the moment to pause and say, how are we going to do this? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right tools? What are we going to do if this first attempt fails? Do we have a plan B and a plan C lined up? etc. And that's where things tend to start to crumble from what I've seen. I hope that was helpful.
It was. Thank you. Lynn, I hope that answers your question. I wanted to talk to you about contextual data because, from my understanding, no one in the betting and gaming space comes close to the contextual data that Fanatics has amassed. So, people refer to Fanatics as like the Amazon of betting and gaming. What makes Fanatics contextual data so unique?
It is connected to something I mentioned earlier, which is the ability to recognize and interact with the same customer on multiple properties. So knowing that I'm a customer who has bought or gifted, 2 Dolphins jerseys in the last 6 months is a huge signal that we have access to that allows us to customize the betting and gaming experience, make it feel personalized, increase click-through, etc. And it's not to say that there's a one-to-one relationship between people who buy jerseys for a team and people who would bet on that team. There's a lot of interesting nuance between, like, what does loyalty mean if you're buying a jersey for a team? Is that also the team that you want to bet on, or do people have different ways of deciding what they want to bet on? Anyway, all of that like behavioral depth stuff is very interesting, but it really comes down to what signals do we get from the Fanatics ecosystem that we can leverage to make a decision in this specific context. And that, there isn't another betting and gaming operator who has that level of context to draw from. So it really is, it has the makings of a huge structural advantage, that nothing's a given and we still have to execute, and none of that is any easier. But it's a huge advantage to draw from.
Awesome. Unrelated, but do you do any betting and gaming yourself?
I do not.
Okay, me either.
Not categorically. It just feels like more work after work.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we come to an end here, I wanted to know if you were a psychic, what would what would the future of customer data be in the next 5 years?
Oh my goodness. I wish. I think that there's a proliferation of like micro industries and tools and companies that has probably maxed out. And these are all tools and companies I'm referring to that like help you maximize your data. Like the level of niche company that I come across in my work today is just absolutely incredible. Whole companies dedicated to just solving one micro problem within the world of data. But because the world of data is so astronomically huge, you can have a whole company for that one problem. I do think that it's sort of getting ripe for consolidation, both in terms of the tools and commercial offerings out there, but and also in terms of strategies. I think, like I said before, maybe, I don't know, 98% of what most businesses need to do with data is not advanced R&D. It's pretty well trodden, well understood monetization of customer relationships. And I do think that the strategies for that are mostly understood at this point in the digital ecosystem that we have. Like, if something as disruptive as Gen AI can come along and we can all adapt to it without too much tumult, then I think that's a sign of a pretty robust set of practices as an industry. So what I would hope to see is an easier time for smaller businesses to get into it. I feel like the barrier to entry is huge right now for smaller businesses because there is so much to discover, so much to learn, and it feels very out of reach. A lot of the times, you can't contract with 15 different companies to help you with each specific part of monetization. And so I think there is a need to make this easier and more accessible for smaller companies, especially smaller publishers. And that's what I'm hoping we start to see, just because I think we've reached critical mass of complexity.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk to you today. One thing that I picked up on that was not planned is we have on the same color, which I think is pretty cool.
You got the memo.
The universe worked it out.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to bring the slides up to the stage. I just want to let everyone know today for attending this live, you're able to save $100 on your AdMonsters Ops ticket using the promo code MWLive. And you did just hear from Madeleine Want. This is just a reminder that we have another keynote locked in, James Rosewell, co-founder of Movement for an Open Web, who will be doing another LinkedIn Live with us in early May. So stay tuned.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us and have a good rest of the day. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.